Hi, everybody. Joe Kane from JoeRocksCoronado here, and a lot of people have asked me to show how I paint a rock. So, first, I select a nice rock, which I have here, and I've already put on the one side a base coat of red with a black border. And I don't have any particular design ideas in mind other than I'm going to use red, black, and white as my colors. And a lot of times when I'm doing this, I'll just use this little wooden thing here to give me a center, so it comes out sort of balanced. The rest of it I will just do freestyle. So I'll just use a pencil and trace around that, and then kind of identify the center. And then from there, it's just really going to be freestyling. So whatever comes to mind is what I'll do. If I have a larger rock, sometimes I'll use a plastic thing to keep to make another line around the outside, but this one's not big enough, so let's just jump right in here and start painting. So I'm selecting out, I have acrylic paint markers here, and I use different brands. These are Poscas, and also I'm using Zayar paint markers, but for today. I have probably 5 or 6 different brands of markers I use. So now I'm just tracing around that pencil line with the medium gauge marker. It's about 3 millimeters, I think, the marker. There's a lot of different sizes of acrylic paint markers that you can use, and depending on what you're doing, this gives me a nice sort of medium-sized line width to start with. And now I'm just going to jump in and start painting. So when you're deciding how you want to do this for your design, it's really very personal. I mean, there's no rules. I just go with whatever kind of strikes me at the moment, and just see what happens. I find it kind of very relaxing to do this. It's almost therapeutic. I've recently been told about art as therapy. If you have any stress in your life, anxiety, whatever, you can use art as a way to let those things go. So I do find it very relaxing, and so I just start in, and I love to see what comes to mind as I go. So don't go into it with any real expectations. And then whatever happens, and you can always adjust. And the worst case scenario, when you're painting a rock, it's kind of nice. You can just paint over the whole thing and start over if you have to. I've had to do that many times, and that's okay. So right now I'm just drawing in some lines to get started. And later on, I'll add in more white, some white highlights and stuff like that. Right now, I'm just getting some basic shapes down. And I'm just eyeballing this thing and deciding as I go how I want to do it. A lot of thoughts go through my head when I'm painting. Sometimes it'll be memories. Sometimes it'll be thinking about people or conversations, and I find that going with just not thinking so much about how the art is looking really helps me, because there's always a point, not always, but a lot of times there's a point when I'm doing a rock painting, and I'll get to a spot where I think, this is terrible. It looks horrible. I don't know what I'm doing. This is a total failure. It's not going to come out right. And I will get in almost a rut. It's sort of, to use a bad pun, you hit rock bottom a little bit. And I don't know who told me this, or maybe I read it somewhere, but they say when you're doing art, a lot of times you have to not look at it too much while it's in progress. Just go with the process. And so what I do when I get to that moment is I just think, well, it could only get better. Maybe as I go, I'll just add in more detail, and maybe it'll get maybe it'll get better. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I end up scrapping the whole thing and, like I said, repaint it and start all over again. But then there's other times when a lot of times I'll be pleasantly surprised, and then the feeling passes, and it's amazing to me sometimes that when I know I've experienced that point where the rock is looking really bad, and then at the end of it, when I have the whole thing in front of me and I'm ready to sign it, and I'll go, you know what, that turned out pretty well. So it's a little bit of a journey when you're doing these things. For me, it is. It's a bit of an emotional journey sometimes. Again, a lot of thoughts can come up, and I add those. Sometimes I add that into the rock. I might be thinking about something that happened, and I'll express that in some of the work that I'm doing. And other times it's just almost, I'll put on music, and it's a complete, almost a blank experience that happens. I will think back later, and that time will have completely disappeared. So it's probably different for everybody, and that's all right. It's not always clear where I'm going to go as I'm painting, so I just keep looking for where the next logical line will go to create some sort of balance. And I'm thinking ahead a little bit to where I'm going to put some of the white highlights, how I'm going to make it more interesting, how I'm going to balance out shape and form and even thickness of lines. I'm going around this border right now. It's tough to freehand for me. Sometimes my hands get kind of shaky, and so a lot of times I have to go back over, or even use maybe use some of that red to cover up a mistake I made or something like that. But when I'm in the moment, I'm just doing it, and I know I can always fix it later, or I can always just chuck it, start over again. So I'm not worrying too much right now. I'm still kind of getting over this feeling that I screwed it up. But I know that's going to pass too, because I think this one's going to turn out all right. It's getting kind of a tribal vibe to it. Something about using a lot of bold lines, and these colors too. They always invoke to me sort of an African tribal feel to them. I'm not sure why that is, other than I know I've seen African tribal shields that are red, black, and white. In Africa, traditional tribal art, they use these different pigments from red rocks, from volcanic rocks, and also they use cow's blood and things like that to dye their, the fabrics or whatever they're using to create their pigments. So maybe that's why they have, or maybe that's why I associate these colors with that. But I like it. Right now I'm starting to really like this rock. And with the, I'm using a thicker black marker now. I switched out to this one that's about 5 millimeter size point, and it gives me a bolder line for the outside border here that I'm working on right now. Yeah, this is looking good. The shape of the rock is not always even, so for me, using these markers can be a bit tricky sometimes. Sometimes as you're going across the rock, the marker will kind of do what it wants and not necessarily what I want. So you got to be careful as you're drawing on these. I use brushes as well a lot of times for different, depending on what I'm doing. So for a pattern like this on a rock that's pretty smooth, it's easy to use a marker. The paint markers work very well for me on these smoother rocks. When the rocks are rougher, then they don't always fill in to the crevices or the pores of the rock, and then it makes it a little bit sketchy. But you can also put a base coat on really thick that kind of seals off some of those pores too. So sometimes I'll do that. And a lot of this, once I decide on a pattern or something like that, it's patience, and you're just doing the same thing over and over, it seems like, to add up to that final effect that you're trying to get. A lot of times I'm working around the rock, and I'm always thinking about where is it going to end up when I get around to the other side again, because especially when I'm making, like in that case, I was doing squares and stuff, and I'm wondering if it's going to come out even when I get to the end. It's not always easy to predict, but you can kind of eyeball it, do a little sanity check once in a while, take a look. So I think now I'm ready for the white highlight. So I have a white paint marker here by Zeyar. It's Zeyar. I think I got them on Amazon. It says it's an extra fine point, which it's pretty fine. These markers can be a little tricky. I've read people on Facebook and online talking about how the ink doesn't always flow, the paint doesn't always flow properly on them, and I do experience that as well. So a lot of times as I'm going, I'll have to either shake up the marker or press the marker down on on off to the side, not on the rock, and try to get that ink flowing again. When you first start out, a lot of times it's kind of watery, and it just doesn't show the proper intensity of color that it should. So the key to that is you got to shake them really well, and if you use them often, they tend to stay flowing better. But if you haven't used one for a while, then take some time. What I do is I take time and I'll test it out on a piece of cardboard or something off to the side in my work area, and just make sure that it's flowing the way I want, because it's really frustrating if you can't get the marker to flow properly. And I love adding in these highlights. It really starts to make the other two colors stand out. Again, no preset plan here for what I want to do, so I'm thinking as I go. And even though, once you put it on there, you're kind of locked into it, I don't worry too much. I know if I really screw something up, I can go back and use the red or the black to cover it up. It really focuses your mind when you're doing this, because of that reason, because if you screw something up, it makes it a little bit extra work to have to go back and fix it and put paint over it and that kind of stuff. So for me, it's almost it keeps me really focused in on what I'm doing at the moment. And it's not always a conscious focus. Sometimes it's almost like a meditation in a certain way, where you're just painting and going with what looks right, trying to get that right balance of the color, the shapes that you're drawing, making sure. So, and that also speaks back to making sure that your marker, your paint, whatever you're using, is prepped properly ahead of time, because it can really interrupt the flow of things if you have to stop because you're having a malfunction of your marker or of your paints or your brushes or whatever you're using to apply the paint. So make sure you get, and part of that too is familiarization with the tools you're using. So I put in a lot of hours painting. I haven't been really painting that long. I've only been painting since sometime in 2016. And for the first year or so, it was a lot of trial and error. Well, even still, to be honest, there's a lot of trial and error. But as I've progressed and as I've continued to practice and learn, I get a little better, and I've gotten a lot better at knowing how the markers are going to work, knowing how the brushes are going to work. It's all self-taught, self-exploration. I mean, I look at other people's videos online, and I do read about the paint and how it works and how it's gonna, acrylic paint has certain properties, and there's so much material out there you can learn from. So don't feel like you're alone in this process. You don't have to figure out everything for yourself. Although a lot of it is just doing. You can't ride a bike by watching a video. You have to get on there. You have to feel how it balances. You have to feel what it means to be in motion. Same thing with painting. So just start doing it and keep doing it. Don't worry about making mistakes. It's a rock. This rock has survived through, millions, billions of years sometimes. And partly that's why I like painting on rocks. Going back to the art therapy kind of thing, if you think about where a rock started from, at some point in time, it was something else. It was sediment, maybe it was volcanic rock, whatever, right? But it was part of a mountain somewhere, part of the landscape. And as the wind and time and erosion and the water, earthquakes, whatever, have beaten down that mountain, the entire mountain is now gone, and this rock or this piece of it has made its way, over millennia down to the ocean shore, where it's been tumbled in the sand and the water and worn down to just this little piece that's left. This is the part that survived, and usually the ones that draw my eye are the ones that have a specific shape that they almost in some cases seem perfect. They're round, or they have a certain shape to them that it makes you wonder how they get that way. But this is the part that survived from the beginning until now, and it somehow ends up on the beach there, and people walk past it and they don't even notice it. But you can pick it up and you can take it with you, and you can make something beautiful out of it, And I have some rocks that are just, I leave them plain. They look so perfect the way they are that I just like to look at them, the grain of the rock and all that. But when I can take that little survivor, that little, I think of it as the heart of the mountain, and you take that and you can put a beautiful pattern on it, or a design that maybe is going to attract someone's eye, or maybe that someone's going to put it in their garden, or maybe they're going to hide it somewhere for someone else to find and surprise someone, and brighten someone's day. And maybe they take that rock home and give it a spot, or maybe they take it and re-hide it somewhere. But it to me, it's very satisfying to participate in that whole process, and to know that I've given this little piece that has survived a little bit of an extra role in its evolutionary history, so to speak. So yeah, rock painting is fun. I've tried a little bit of canvas work now, and it's nice too. And I like the medium. I like what I've done so far on canvas. But it's a different mindset, and maybe I'll get to the point where I enjoy that as much. But right now, I'm really enjoying painting these rocks. Another part of the rock painting process is the feedback that I've gotten online. I've been completely shocked and surprised by the amount of feedback and the enthusiasm and the appreciation that I've gotten from people who, first of all, there's so many rock painters out there, amazing artists, and also just people who are enthusiasts, who love to paint little messages and put them out there for people to find. It's a whole little community that I didn't know existed, and so doing this has been really fun, connecting with people and hearing people's stories and how they came to it and what they bring to it and what it means to them. So I think I'm pretty close here. It's got nice balance to it. It started off, it was a nicely shaped rock. It wasn't perfect, and I know my freehand lines aren't perfect, but I'm pretty happy with it. So that's how you paint a rock. And if you like it and you're satisfied with how it looks, then it's time to apply the old signature. So I'm just going to go in here and sign my name. Sometimes I'll do this after I seal them, but whatever. In this case, I'm just going to sign it and I'll seal it later. I usually use a clear acrylic. Sometimes it's matte or sometimes it's glossy, depending on the design. This one looks more like a matte. I think I'll put a matte sealer on this one. And then I like to put the date. So pretty much all my rocks, if you find one, it'll have the date. I usually start with the year, so 2019, 02, 07 for today. And that's how you paint a rock, and there's my signature. So thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed watching me paint this rock. I know it's been a long video, but if you enjoyed it, then it was worth it. Thanks.